Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sasha Star. It's Ukrainian talk show on Pod TV, and we have today distinguished guests, Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Great to have you.
Sasha, good to be here.
And Ivan Kucherenko from Kiev, Ukraine. Welcome to the show, Ivan.
Hello, Sasha. Hi, Jonathan. Hello, everyone.
Okay, and we'll start head on right away from the very, very important event which happened a few days ago. It's a interview of President Zelensky, where he touched a lot of subjects. And since whatever I've heard is coming from the mouth of the president, you have to really, really evaluate it and make a lot of assumptions and maybe a short view on the future, maybe near future and not so near future. I would like to start discussing interview from several different perspectives because there are a lot of major points were discussed. They're not equally important for sure, and some of it he, in my opinion, messed up. Let me start with ones that he messed up, and then we'll go to the real thing. There was only one thing, in my opinion, where he messed up. It's where he's saying that Ukraine is prepared for a long war as long as there will be fewer and fewer Ukrainians killed. That's okay, that's logical, although I don't see how it's possible to achieve, because if the war is going on and Russian is throwing its missiles and so on, drones or whatever, I don't see how you can limit the loss of lives. But okay, at least he's mindful of that. Now, what really, in my opinion, he messed up, when he compares that situation in Ukraine with Israel, what he's saying is that, look, Israel is fighting long war for so many years. It's supported by United States and it's doing very well. And Ukraine should try to do the same thing. Oh my God, what a mess up. How you can compare Russia, the major nuclear power on the planet, with the some Arabic tribes, whatever they're Palestinians or some others or so on, which don't have really any weaponry, they don't have armies, they don't have government of any kind. I mean, it's so absurd, and I'm surprised that Zelensky.
Israel's near opponents are relatively weak compared to Israel.
Absolutely, and Israel is much stronger technologically, military-wise, than Ukraine is.
Right.
I suggest that Ukraine has to.
It's a bad analogy that you use.
To get, but this is absolutely, this, in my opinion, he completely blew it, and it just doesn't make sense. It's very difficult to criticize because there is nothing to criticize completely.
But you're right. It is a relatively minor point compared to the rest of his speech.
Agree. Okay, that's why I wanted to start it, get it out of the way. Yeah. Say, Zelensky, you are not right. You have to.
You just say, Zelensky, your messaging needs a little work, but otherwise, we'll forgive you.
Okay, now the other things, in my opinion, he's done extremely well, and those points are far way more important than comparison Ukrainian-Russian war to Arab-Israeli wars, okay, if you will, but they're not really war. I mean, if today's 6 days war would happen today, it would be 6 hours war, because Israel progressed so much in every respect, from economy, from military, from any point of view, and his enemies are still about the same, maybe even bigger. Okay, now I think Ivan, you can contribute, please, because I'm getting lost at where to start and what's most important thing. I think okay, let's talk about corruption, because corruption, this is where United States and NATO, they're all putting face of the table and saying, okay, guys, here is corruption and so on. I think Zelensky did the right thing. He compared corruption in a wartime as the very, very uh, heinous offense, punishable by life at least, or close to it. The only thing is, I was surprised that the amount of corruption is uh, some kind of 2 million grivni or so. So somebody made translations that it amounts to $500,000. So he says, so somebody is doing corruption worth say $400,000 in grivnias. So that's not so bad, means the guy is okay.
Almost reminds you of what Senator Everett Dirksen, the late Senator Everett Dirksen, used to say when he said in the Senate, "Oh, a billion here, a billion there, and pretty soon you're talking about real money." So this is on a magnitude, order of magnitude even less. It is still wrong behavior, but we're talking about, because we're talking about relative magnitude of offenses. This is corruption, but yeah, it occurs in every war. It occurred in World War II.
I would limit amount $1,000. However, I'm willing to increase it to $5,000 because $1,000 could be somebody's mathematical mistake and some inaccuracy, or somebody put an extra zero on the numbers or so on. Okay, leave it at $5,000. For Ukraine during the war, it's a too big amount to be ignored. Now, so the other issue is how that corruption or fight with corruption will be enforced. Which way? How? He mentioned some organs which many commentators were horrified and say that these are the most corrupted organs, so how they will fight corruptions if they are corrupted more than anybody else. But I will leave that because I'm not familiar that much with this situation. However, I would like to, from this point, lead to another important, in my opinion, point. It's forthcoming or not forthcoming election next year. So as a part of fighting corruption, the election could be a very useful device, except he mentions that he was pressured by Senator Graham, who was in Ukraine several times, and he is pressing, except I don't understand, Jonathan, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody else suggested to Zelensky to hold the election next year except Phil Graham?
Not aware of it.
Not aware of. And actually, in some comments that I've heard, it was said that it was only Graham who is talking about the necessary election next year in Ukraine, and no one else, at least from American, and I never heard any European leaders would press Zelensky. So Zelensky answers actually to Mr. Graham. He said, look, election is a part of democracy, and that's what we had in Ukraine for so many years, and we are going to have that. There are a few questions. Considering the war, and not extraordinary, it's a war that never happened in history of mankind. This kind of war where two advanced armies, except that one is much bigger and the country is much bigger, and that country is aggressor, and they are fighting now for a year and a half in a very hard fights against each other. Jonathan, again, correct me if I'm wrong, I never seen anything like this, except maybe Second World War, probably.
Well, a rough analogy, again, the analogy that I've used before would be the American Civil War.
Yeah.
in which essentially the Confederacy was counting, even after their defeat at Gettysburg, they were counting on the 1864 election for a Democrat Party president, in this case McClellan, to be elected in place of Lincoln, and they knew that McClellan would be much more in favor of a negotiated peace and allowing this Confederacy to survive. So that's what they were considering and counting on. And that is obviously what Russia is counting on next year's election to, if the winner happens to be President Trump, presumably, as the Republican nominee, they are counting on him. They're counting on getting a better deal from him than they would be if President Biden or it was reelected or whatever. They are counting on electoral politics to do for them what they cannot achieve on the battlefield. And as I pointed out before, Ukraine can render all of this irrelevant by simply achieving a major operational victory that renders the discussion completely moot. If they cut the link between Crimea and Russia, which they are in the process of doing, they are making steady progress towards that goal. And the rest of the world is realizing this increasingly. If Ukraine cuts the link, forces the surrender of Crimea and any Russian occupation forces, that is a major operational defeat for Russia. They will not be able to hide it. They will not be able to explain it away. And we can then be in a position to force an armistice, to force the Russians to agree to an armistice, because the Ukrainians will then be free, as once they sever Crimea from Russian control, they'll be able to switch their forces and commit their reserves to sweeping out the rest of Russian occupation forces in Ukraine and restoring the status quo ante bellum.
Jonathan, about the armistice, I always wanted to ask you one question. The latest armistice that we can think of is Korea, something between North and South Korea. Okay.
Well, it's lasted a long time.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. But North Korea is not Russia. Do you see some slight difference between them?
And NATO is not South Korea. NATO is a much larger alliance. It can enforce and deter the Russians with the threat of even greater punishment. Even if Ukraine is not a member of NATO, as I pointed out, the Ukrainians can negotiate bilateral agreements with individual members of NATO.
They're doing that right now, and it's not smooth sailing so far.
Right.
They're working on it. Okay, let's call it.
It's not perfect, but it's the best way.
I know. Let's give a little bit more time.
If you want perfect, go to Burger King.
Let's come back to the election question. And
yes, this is exactly what I wanted.
I'm not sure that this is a good idea to hold any elections in 2024. And there are several reasons beside this. First of all, a large part of Ukraine is currently being occupied, and it will not be possible to hold any elections both on occupied territories and on those territories which are being struck by Russian attacks, because it will not just be safe for Ukrainian people to get to the election points, and it's not safe.
Maybe it's even impossible.
Yeah, not safe for their lives, and we don't have such number of bomb shelters to held election there. So the reason of safety is number one. The reason of occupied territories is number two. The reason of Russia influencing the media landscape in Ukraine is the third major point, because we've seen how Russia interfered into the election process in the United States when they tried to achieve Trump's victory, to help Trump win, and beside that, to decrease the chances of Democrats to win on those elections. So all their possibilities in social media with all their army of bots, etc. whether they are losing on the battlefield, and when they are decreasing, they have decreased number of their soldiers, their resources in the media, in social media, their army of bots, of virtual users is still remains. They unfortunately they have enough money to bribe any media, any journalists in the world, and we see how they're influencing the world minds using the media. And of course, they have such possibilities in Ukraine as well. While they are keeping their focus on Ukraine, while they are not while they are not losing the war in Ukraine, not lost the war in Ukraine, of course they will interfere in any election process in Ukraine in order to achieve some of their bribed politicians to win this process and to change the government of Zelensky to who is more negotiable towards Russia, and for who will be eager to give some Ukrainian occupied territories to Russia, to make some kind of another Minsk agreements, etc. And Russians have enough resources to bribe even the Pope of Catholic Church, for him to tell about great Russian history and the Russian Empire. I have a really nice video for today, and I want you just to watch it. It's a speech of Pope on the event, on the Catholic event in St. Petersburg, and it's really interesting speech. I'm not sure that person who really wants to stop the war will go with such speech. This speech, in my opinion, is throwing more and more wood into the fire of the war, because this war, when Russians started it, Putin announced that they are restoring actually the Russian Empire. The Soviet Union, they tried to restore it in its previous borders with the Ukraine, and they will not allow other countries to influence the former subjects of the Soviet Union. And we are seeing how the Pope actually spreads the same narratives. And probably this is a question of money as well. So let's watch this video.
Voi siete regni della grande Russia, la grande Russia dei santi, il re, la grande Russia di Pietro Grande, di Caterina II, quell'impero russo grande, colto, di tanta cultura, di tanta umanità. Non crederate mai di questa eredità, voi siete gli eredi della grande madre Russia, andate avanti con quello, e grazie per la vostra, per il vostro modo di essere e per il vostro essere russi.
What on earth is that man thinking?
Oh my God, zero knowledge of history, zero historical facts, complete. I'll stop right there. I'm not going to call him names. Let me stop right here. Although I don't see why not. I'll do it a little bit later. Ivan, I think...
Coming back to the question, unfortunately, Russians still have enough money to bribe everyone on the earth, including Ukrainian politicians as well. When they are not able to stop this war on the battlefield to achieve victory, they can interfere into elections, they can bribe media, they can bribe politicians, they can bribe celebrities for them to support Russia and to say that they are doing something right, and they're just going their way of great Russia and other imperialistic bullshit, which actually provoked that war. And what elections can we talk about in such conditions? Until Russia is not focused on the processes, on some critical processes within the inside Russia, until the revolution in Russia will appear, and probably this will happen after the death, after the kill of Prigozhin. And until that, they can spread their resources outside, and they will spread it. While there have been, while some supply chains for their military production are cut off, they still have enough money to invest them into other aspects of the life, not physical, but the intellectual, media, journalists, politicians, celebrities. And in this case, then after that, we see how different celebrities, even including the Catholic Pope, are supporting Russia in what they are doing, actually, and saying such kind of bullshit.
I would have to investigate if Russia doesn't hold a mortgage over Vatican, so they are acting a certain way. Have to check this possibility. Actually, finish off with election question. Zelensky started his comments with suggesting that election would cost $5 billion, and in wartime, this money would be used elsewhere on front lines rather than an election. But I have this comment to make. Let's see if someone lives on the territory recently occupied by the Russia, say Zaporizhia. Okay, so how physically he can vote in that election. So it cuts off immediately, say approximately 20% of the electors, they are cut off the election process. So how complete is the election where only 80% are eligible to vote? The other
Again, you have a situation that is more analogous to the American Civil War, where they conducted a presidential election, even though there was the Confederacy, which was clearly not part of it. They were conducting an albeit incomplete election, but nevertheless an election which had political legitimacy. And so, given the example of that historical analogy and the current situation, it is incumbent, it is imperative for the Ukrainian armed forces and its political leadership to reduce Russian occupation of existing Ukrainian territory as much as possible between now and any potential election date next year in Ukraine. Because if they, at a minimum, sever the Crimea from Russian control and then use their reserves to systematically drive out the remaining Russian occupation forces in Ukraine. And as that proceeds, any election process, any hope of the Russians have of overturning the result by elections either in Ukraine or the United States will become increasingly smaller and smaller. They can render it irrelevant with operational victories on the battlefield. Severance of Crimea being the first and most important.
It's happening right now. Jonathan, in all fairness, I would like to make a comment to your comment, is that remember that 150 years ago or so,
all analogies are imperfect.
No, but at that time, election was, okay, you're for this guy or you're for that guy, and that's the end of the story. Today, elections in democratic countries are much more complicated than that. There has to be a process through which both or more than two parties have to acknowledge their platforms. They have to talk to electorate and trying to convince them that their way is better than other way. Now, with Ivan, correct me if I'm wrong, there is only one major television channel which belongs to Ukrainian government. How you can call it a fair election if there is only one side can express their view and the opponents?
No, Sasha, you're not right. There are several TV channels still and there is a government. There are government channels. There are community channels. There are commercial channels. But their news block before the full-scale war, when Russia invaded Ukraine, all these channels, they had their own news blocks, like evening news, morning news, etc. But after the 24th of February last year, all channels united into the so-called broadcasting marathon, and they have the united news block when the editorial teams of several channels are united, and they're broadcasting 24/7 with the news content. But it doesn't mean that there is only one TV channel, government channel.
Okay, sorry, I have
So
to correct
it's
Okay.
probably you're talking about some narratives spread by Ukrainian opposition politics
most likely.
who are owners of their own TV channels, and they are not allowed to be in this marathon because they sometimes call sometimes they're spreading news which are not going for good to Ukraine, but they are going for good towards Russia, and they are not syncing with the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine in the information they spread, and that's regularly doing some harm to the Ukrainian army. And several days ago, we had a statement of Hanna Mahler, who is deputy Minister of Defense, towards those TV channels and YouTube channels that after they've spread some news about the location of one of Ukrainian brigades, they were highly attacked by Russians, and that's one of examples why not TV channels are in the marathon.
Well, anyway, let's two issues. Number one, let's say there is election, imperfect and horrible election, and Zelensky wins. Okay, so all that minus $5 billion, we are back to square one. Okay, move ahead. Everything is great. Second outcome is that somehow Zelensky is losing to someone. Okay, so he lost election, minus $5 billion. Somebody else became president. What has been achieved? So remember that on the road to election, both sides have to talk to electorate. They have to express their views. They have to explain why the president is the best and why the other president is the worst, the criminal. They have to get rid of him, and so on and on and on. What use for Ukraine as a whole? What's the use of that process right now? Jonathan, what do you think?
Well, in the context of the overall war effort, the best thing that the Ukrainians can do, once again, I sound like a broken record.
No, but I love your broken record.
Well, in this case, in order for the best outcome for the Ukrainians would be for Zelensky to maintain and be reelected. And the best way right now, given the wartime situation, that he can secure his own reelection is to achieve a significant operational victory on the battlefield, which inflicts a major defeat upon Russian armed forces, and that is the severance of Crimea from Russia. Once they do that, that's a major operational victory with political significance and repercussions. And then Zelensky can build upon that. And in the time between then that operational victory and any election next year, then he can build upon that to increasingly drive the remaining Russian occupation forces in Ukraine out of Crimea. That will more or less give him as solid as possible a foundation for re-election, and then thereby strengthening his own political stability and position within Ukraine. And then the Ukrainians will be in their strongest possible position, along with their Western allies, to compel Russia to accept an armistice, a ceasefire. the best option, and that is the best operational, that is the best political condition that you can achieve given the politically irreconcilable goals of both Russia and Ukraine. One side or the other must be forced by virtue of results on the battlefield to accept the temporary loss of their political objectives. And in this case, it has to be Russia, which has to give up its overall objective of conquest of Ukraine.
Jonathan, I agree with you. And if you would live in a perfect world, that scenario.
And in this less than perfect world, a ceasefire is the best you can get right at this point.
Jonathan, let me pay your attention. Ivan, and correct me if I'm wrong. I think Zelensky in this interview softened his approach to the war and to the result of the war. If before he was, for the last year and a half, he was saying that we have to reach our borders of 1991. And it was not going any way away, even a millimeter away from it. In this interview, however, as the way I understood, he mentioned that they would come, the Ukrainian army would come on the border of entering Crimea and would stop right there, getting into negotiations with Russia. And in my opinion, and listening to other commentators, what they're saying is that United States have a certain stigma about Russia falling apart to several different states. And they're scared of that more than anything else in the world for various reasons. And Ukraine, decisive victory of Ukraine, which Ukraine, in my opinion, could achieve a year ago after they broke through Kharkiv and Kherson. And if the United States and the West supply at that time enough offensive weapons, Ukraine would chase Russia all the way out of Russian army, the way out of Ukraine, because they just couldn't resist the Ukrainian attack. But since that never happened, and Russians were able to build a very potent line of defense or so on, so now to penetrate them, you need incredible efforts, and I'm not sure even the best armies in the world would be able to do that. And in fact, Ukrainians in this situation, they had to invent a new way of modern war, which nobody has experienced it, and nobody can even to sort of devise the program how to wage this type of war. So in my opinion, what's happened is that West, United States, they slowed the delivery of their most modern weapons. So Ukraine still going ahead, and actually in the last few days, quite successfully, but that may be too little too late and may not be enough time by the end of the season, which you're talking about mid-October, beginning of November, to get to their goal, whether it's a border entrance to Crimea, or even to enter the Crimea, or being close to that, or take at least Melitopol, maybe Berdyansk, or just cut it in half, cut it all supply lines, or so on. That's all achievable. But it will not be a decisive breakthrough. It will be significant progress, but not decisive breakthrough. So there comes a season, winter season. Although if Ukrainian would have by that time ATACMS missiles, I don't know what kind of winter season are we talking about. What ATACMS are not flying during the winter time? I never heard about that. So if the attack of Ukrainians will continue, they can still achieve a lot. But again, as I said in previous programs, it seems to me that Biden has his timeline to get the Ukraine major offensive sometimes in the spring, summer of next year and have victorious event, whether it's a complete victory of Ukraine, which is unlikely, but some kind of a truce with Russia or something, because the most thing what the West really wants, it's a peace between Russia and Ukraine. It doesn't matter on what conditions, whether Ukraine gave 10% of territory or 20% or 45%. It doesn't matter as long as there is a peace. Okay,
And
that's all they want.
And the problem with that is that any peace or arrangement which rewards Russia in any way, shape, manner, or form for its unprovoked aggression against Ukraine is not and can never be called a treaty of peace. That is a treaty of appeasement. That is peace at any price. And that only sets the stage for another conflict down the line. So,
and not only with Russia, because other countries with the autocratic regimes will understand that they can seize a piece of territory of any other country with military power, and they will not have any consequences for them. And
any imperfect peace there's a price to be paid on down the line. We could have avoided that price back in 1994 by simply allowing Ukraine to become an independent nuclear power. But the United States was not willing to do that. And unfortunately, and even former President Clinton admitted that his support of ineffectively disarming Ukraine of nuclear weapons, his support of that agreement set the stage in some manner for the current war by not allowing Ukraine to become an independent nuclear power. And I had made that point, ironically enough, back in an article in 1994 and in an editorial, that we were setting the stage for a future war. So in any case, but that's enough about that. That's hindsight, as they say, is 2020.
Jonathan, for the last several months, I was very critical of George Bush Sr., that he failed to disarm Russia in 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed. Russia was poor, like I can't even compare it to, and it was so easy to disarm them, and he just failed to do that. Now, remember, there were several programs on at the time at World Edition or some other programs on POT TV, who was the worst president of the United States. So my opinion always was that it's Bush Sr. And I was always alone in my opinion. Nobody ever supported me. And lately, finally, I started to get some people, especially in Ukrainian blogs and so on, where they acknowledge that Bush Sr. made a huge mistake when he failed to disarm Russia at least from nuclear weapons. So finally, voices of that are starting to appear elsewhere, because I thought I'm the only one in the world who thinks that way, but it's not the case, actually. So actually about timing, and what we discussed is that Joe Biden is trying to do anything possible to engineer the peace or victory of Ukraine, but let's talk about peace process, close to his election, so he would then guarantee his election. I must say that I'm not impressed with Joe Biden for several reasons.
Well, what Biden is likely to hear is a counter chorus from the opposite side, echoing James Carville back in 1992, saying, "It's the economy, stupid."
It's economy, but Jonathan, economy is doing fantastically well. I don't know if they will do so well in the summer of next year.
That depends upon who you talk to. And there are conflicting sources of information even on the state of the economy. I mean, I look at a whole range of opinions, and if you want an opinion that supports your particular narrative, you can find it. But there are still economic realities which have yet to be fully imposed upon the world, in the coming year. And that is what is going to influence things much beyond the expectations of anyone sitting here now. But right now, the one reality that I am still very much beholden to is that the Ukrainians are still very much in control of their own destiny, and their surest grip on stability for themselves in the coming year is an operational victory in Ukraine, and particularly in Crimea. I'm sorry to be repeating myself on this, but if they achieve that victory, that is a convincing operational defeat, which can well alter the political reality in the theater.
Jonathan, if you will imagine a pyramid, so the victory of Ukraine in this battlefield is right on the very top of the pyramid. Okay, I agree with you on that. And U.S. election, we are close to the end of our program for today, but next program, we will definitely discuss elections in the United States and its effect on Ukraine and Ukrainian war.
Oh, I can hardly wait.
Yes. I wish today was already Friday, but we have to finish today's program. I really appreciate your input. Thank you so much, and hope to see you on Friday, same place, same time. Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.